Okay, so what's the intro again? I'm blanking, I'm so scared. We have our Chaya Chats series here today, and this is a podcast called Marthoma Effect, which is where we hear from the experiences of many people and how they play in our faith. So with me today, I have Susmin Auntie
Chechi?
Are you sure?
Yes.
Okay, fine. If you say so. We have Susmin Chechi, or I'll just refer to you as Susmin because we are familiar with each other. So we are coming to you today from Adelaide. So finally, we've done Melbourne, we've done Perth. Finally, a place of quality, Adelaide. I'm kidding. Susman, before we really get stuck into it, why don't you just tell our viewers a bit about who you are, what you do.
Okay, I am a youth in Eparchy, not a senior youth, one of the youth here. I am one of the catechism teachers as well. And I am someone who's studying to be a professional teacher as well.
Okay, that's amazing to hear. So like you mentioned, you are a proud Syro-Malabar Catholic, and one thing that we should always do is share our experiences, namely our spiritual experiences. We call it a Christ encounter. I call it a Marwala moment, Marwala being the words that St. Thomas said to Christ, my Lord and my God, in Aramaic. So, Susman, what is your Marwala moment? What is that moment, or even just that thing that has brought you to give your life to Christ and for His church?
Oh, I think for me, it was in a a youth camp. So it was during an adoration. I was full of guilt. I was full of sin, and the people who were running it were telling me, give your life to God, surrender yourself. And it was something that I've heard so much, and I was like, I don't know if that's going to help. But I told God, God, I'm done. I really want to get close to you, but I just don't know how. So I was like, I surrender everything, and I surrendered the sin in my life. And God was just like, say no more. And He took my hand, and since then we've been running.
Praise God for that. So how old were you when this happened?
21.
21, okay. So I'm sure that was 21 years of wrestling with your faith, maybe going up and down periods of lukewarm faith, something a lot of our youth, and our viewers just in general might experience, So, God touches us at any time, and it's just up to us to say yes. So how has since then God acted in your life,
Funny thing, I did not actually read the Bible for a very long time growing up. I only read it when we had family time. But I started reading the Bible by myself, and I started to understand what is the meaning and use of the Bible. And so I read the Bible in the morning, and then I read it at night, so before I go to sleep. And I don't just read it. I try and take, maybe it's just one verse, and I try to highlight and underline things that really resonated to me as a person. And it doesn't have to be something so strong. It's sometimes just one word. Maybe it's just Christ, like that, or anything like light. And before I go to placement or work, I try and pray. So I pray for myself, the people I'm around, and I'm scared of driving. So I tend to be
I've been in your car. I know the feeling.
So I tend to say, God, keep me safe, keep those around safe, and keep this car safe. So it's just constantly having communication with God. Wherever I go, I'm like, God, be with me as I go into this classroom. God, be with me. Just constantly keeping that connection with Him, not just having Him in momentary times or just for what I want, but everything. Even if it sounds weird, you're like, God, I'm going over to the kitchen, tell me what to cook. It sounds weird, but I'm just constantly getting used to talking to Him so that when big things happen, when things are scary, I can just straight away be like, God.
Yeah, praise God for that. Yeah, I think, we tend to have this idea that we need to limit our time to God as big, extravagant moments, be that the most solemn qurbana we can offer, or spend an hour and a half in adoration, or, read a full book of the Bible in a night, which is all things we can do. But, your experience and your faith journey shows that, it's just the simple things, be that one Bible verse a day, one word, like you said, or even just a one sentence prayer before you get in the car and drive, namely you especially, because you're driving. But, it's the small things we do to touch with God, and, your experience says that so much. So Thank you for sharing that, Sisman. So one of the main things I've brought you on the podcast today is you mentioned teaching, you mentioned your own placement, you mentioned catechism teaching, and I really want to, really nitpick your experiences and, maybe give our viewers something that they can learn from your experience. So, we chatted before, so you mentioned something about spending a year out of Adelaide and going to Port Pirie. Do you want to just give me a quick summary of that once more?
So I got the opportunity to go to Port Pirie for work. I actually didn't want to go. It was something that I actually rejected at first, but I prayed to God. I was like, God, tell me if this is something you want me to do. And God didn't say anything. I read the Bible, didn't get anything. I was like, oh, what is this? So I just I was scared. I'm not someone who wants to leave my house that often. Yeah. So I was like, God, you know what? I'm going to reject this. If this is from you, bring it back. If not, just let it go. And so I thought, I'm just going to say no. So I said no to the person who was offering it. I ended up, thinking, oh, it's not coming back. A couple of months later, I get a phone call from the principal at the school I was working at, asking me to come and join them. Again, he's like, look, I understand that, you gave me your reasons why. And he's like, these are reasons why we would still want to hire you. And I kept on saying reasons why they shouldn't, but he just kept on finding solutions to it. So I was like, maybe this is God saying, take the job, I'm giving it to you. So it was just a experience of like God just being like, this is for you, I will take care of you. And there's been a lot of things that has changed me as a person, just taking that leap of faith.
Yeah, fair enough. So how far away is Port Pirie from Adelaide?
2 hours and 20 minutes.
Drive, flight, train, walk, Uber? Drive. Okay, not bad. So obviously you had your own place to stay there and everything, and you were living on your own, right?
Yeah.
So that must have been a big change from living, you've got a family of 5.
Yeah.
Obviously, and you've got plenty of other family and friends who always have seen at your house. Your mum runs tuition, so your house is always packed. So what was that change like going from such a I guess a place with so much people to then going to a place of solitude?
I think, to be honest, it was something that made me realize to be comfortable with myself. Like, it's okay to be alone. You don't always have to be around because God's there. And one thing I picked up was no matter how quiet the place was, I always felt safe because I knew God was there with me. I knew that He's the reason why I'm here. He's going to protect me. He's made sure that his child is nowhere close to being in danger. So I think it's just that having that reassurance that He's with me. Yes, I had my lonely time, but there were times where I was just like, I wish I was at home.
I'm sure there was a lot of crying in the car.
Yeah, there was. So just I think whenever I'm saying bye to Mum from going from home from Adelaide to Port Pirie, I was like, God, I don't want to go, but I was like, I have to make the call. And it was times where there was sadness, but there was always joy.
Yeah, that's true. You mentioned that God has called you to go to Port Pirie. That doesn't mean that time is going to be full of sunshine and rainbows, right? But we stick it out to what God has called us to, and like you said, people come and go. You have that shift of going to solitude, but God is always there, whether we realize it or not. So what was the biggest change you noticed with maybe how students are now versus how you were as a student, or the kind of environments we had in school? What's changed?
I think with kids now, they are facing more adult things than when I was growing up. Phone, Instagram, Snapchat, TikTok.
TikTok has just started, sure.
All those things were phones were there, but I didn't use my parents only gave me a phone. They allowed me to buy a phone or anything was when I was 18.
Whoa.
Yeah. So I didn't have so much social media impact in my life. And I only got into Instagram, TikTok, I don't have TikTok, Snapchat, all of that when I was an adult. So it didn't impact me so much to the point that it's impacting young people now.
Yeah.
And it's cyberbullying is more out there for kids as well.
Definitely. When I was in high school, definitely noticed that. I didn't engage, Sisman. I saw that side. I know. Yeah.
But I feel like kids are more involved, and it's affecting them mentally a lot more. And it's just realizing that these kids are dealing with adult stuff that I only dealt with when I was at the age of an adult.
Yeah, definitely. I've seen that even in the current generation now. There's words that I've seen in young kids' vocabulary that I couldn't even imagine coming out of, a year 3's math even, or even, year 5, year 7, like the stuff they get exposed to is a lot different and it affects them, right? Like we've seen it with the kids in our church as well, right? Like they know a lot more than we think. And we've seen that, we'll touch on it later when we talk about catechism teaching, right? But, they get exposed to a lot more early. And so it's important that, I guess that as teachers, people like you stay vigilant and you become aware of what kids are experiencing and learn to, accommodate your methods accordingly. So then are there, what were the difficult moments of faith that you experienced, especially with dealing with those kids, I guess? Or how did you live out, I guess the better question is, how did you live out your faith in that environment?
I think it was realization. Because if you think about it, you take a plant and you put it in an environment that is toxic, what's going to happen to the plant?
It dies?
It dies, yeah.
Okay. I skipped biology.
But the plant is not able to breathe. So it's just I was in an environment where faith wasn't super strong.
Yeah.
The faith I had was at home. I went to a school that, wasn't following faith. And so it was just having to understand, Sussman, you need to put your faith in God. Yes, God brought you here, but you need to continue putting God first. Because there were times where I would just be the way I think, the way I talk has been affected by the environment I'm with. I come back home and I'll tell stories to my friends and I realize I don't have a filter. I usually have a filter and I was where did my filter go? And I had to dial down back and be Sussman, you are a child of God. No matter where you go, you need to make sure that your environment is not affecting you as a person. So it was spiritually challenging as well. And there was a lot of emotional challenge where I was God, why'd you bring me here? I am crying every day. I need you to take care of me. But it was a lot of growth in that way as well, living in a different place and living a different environment.
Yeah, fair enough. And did you, obviously, I'm sure you didn't hide it from people that you were Christian students as well. You mentioned that they're in a very different environment than, we would have grown up with. But, how was that met when you were trying to, maybe be a beacon of Christ's light? How was that met by them, or how did they respond to that?
It was funny, they would see the cross on my neck and they were oh, miss, are you a Christian? I'm yeah. And it's just I don't really try and talk so much into it, but they would be questioning oh, you believe in God? And I was yeah. So it's just trying to live a Christian life through the school as well, because there's so many things they talk about and I'm just not appropriate, don't talk about it, you don't need to, but it's just, having to learn to understand that I'm not there's so many things that I don't get involved in. So, yeah.
Fair enough. And, you mentioned before something about, kids you dealt with that, sometimes it's not about what you say or how you acted, right? How did your faith play into that?
Oh, so there's been times for example, there's two scenarios. One is a child where I knew that he was struggling. I knew that there was things he was going through. The school would tell us what these kids are going through, and I would just basically, whenever I see him, he was in my class, I would be hey, hi, it's great seeing you every time I saw him. And I think, I don't know how, but that was enough for him to be realizing that I cared. He would come up to me, I think a couple of days later, he came up to me and he's Miss, I'm so sorry, I missed 3 days of the lesson. I had stuff happening at home, but I'm here now, I'll be here. I'm that's good. That's all that matters, that you come, you're at school. That's all I need. It's just when he saw that he's noticed, he felt this sense of comfort and support. And I've had another kid who we started off not in the good and the best foot. I think he called me swear words and he got suspended, and then he came back and I thought I was oh my goodness, this kid's gonna make my life hard, because we had this up and forth. And I just stopped him before getting to class and I'm look, I really enjoy having you in my class and I really want us to have a positive relationship and I want to help you learn. I don't want to continue having this riffle between us. So please, I didn't say please. I didn't say please. I was just let's start fresh. Let's, go through this in a better way. And that was enough. That kid ended up saying I was his favorite teacher. Whenever he came to class, he'll come and sit right next to me. And I'm what are you doing? He's hi, miss. Just want to say hi. And I was oh. And he would if anyone says anything bad about me, they're shush, Miss Matthews is trying to talk. And I was bless him. It just you realize when you're just trying to be kind and loving, the kids receive it. They just absorb it and you're just is that all I need to do? It's surprising how little things we do is enough for other people to feel loved.
Fair enough. Yeah, no, that's good to hear. So what I can take away from that is, especially when you might be in an environment where, faith is, the Christian faith is not very well accepted, we limit our mindset to what evangelization is to be like, to recite Bible verses and practically, put a power of healing over someone when we put our hands over them. But like your experience shows, it's as simple as being Christ. You don't have to say the word of God or, say the words of Christ to everyone, but it's just about being Christ to other people, which is important. I think, we mentioned that kids are getting exposed to so much more, a lot more. And, when I think about the kind of teachers I had, the younger teachers versus the older teachers, there's definitely younger teachers that probably push for, more principles and more ideologies that maybe kids aren't at the maturity to get at yet. So I think it's important that we have people like you, who are there to still enforce Christian values. If we want to bring more people to Christ, we need people like you to really be those Christian models in schools, even in, the medical industry, the engineering industry, any industry whatsoever. So thank you for sharing that, Susmin. Out of curiosity, any like crazy stories or anything completely outrageous happened while you were there?
I had a kid jump out of my classroom window. It was a bit
Are your classes that bad?
No, he just jumped out and I was like, oh, what's happening? And it wasn't a kid from my class. It was a kid who was just from a random class. He was in my class and then he jumps out because he wanted to escape. And I was like, what do I do? And I've had kids who...
Well, I've been in your catechism class. I know how it feels to want to escape.
It's funny. I've had kids fight in front of me as well.
Whoa.
It was.
And then you just like hit him with an uppercut and be like, not in my class.
No. I just stood there being like, I don't know what to do. But luckily one of the boys put his hand up. He was like, I'm not fighting you. And I was like...
Jesus says turn the other cheek, right?
Thank you, because I had to call someone or something. Immediately I was like shaking as well, and I was like, oh my gosh, I've never seen this in my life. I've heard about it, but the kid was luckily like defensive. So
fair enough. So one of the other things, I think I want to just quickly highlight with your Port Pirie experience. So Port Pirie was 2.5 hours away from Adelaide, right? So obviously you were living in Port Pirie, yet pretty much every Sunday, I noticed you back in, our parish in Adelaide Central to teach catechism. Like, what motivated you to do that?
I think for me, I've heard people like leaving their responsibilities for church because of circumstances and stuff. And if they can't, they wanted to move away. But I think in my heart, it was just like, God has given me a job. It's a blessing from God. I should continue doing what I can. And it's not like, I'm not saying, some people can't do that because their circumstances, but I was like, I have the opportunity to do it. I got a car as well. So I was just like, possibly I can come back home. And it was just like, I can't leave the church because God has blessed me with the church. And plus I was teaching year 11s and I like teaching my year 11s. So I was like, I want to come back. And I was like, I need to make time for them as much as I make time for these kids. So it was just like, I was like, God, if you want me to come back, I will come back. And he did. He constantly made it clear to me, like, I need you to be back in my parli as well. Like, yes, you are looking after the Port Pirie kids, but you have responsibility to come to my parli. And God was telling me to do that. So that's why I came back.
Fair enough. So I think that segues us nicely into the next part of your actual experience teaching catechism. So you've been teaching catechism for how many years?
7, 6.
Sheesh.
Is it? I don't know.
Teach me. You're the teacher.
You were the first one I taught. So when you were in year 7, how old are you now?
I must have been 2015.
Yes.
So yeah, Susman, it's been time. Wow. Okay. Anyway. So what actually motivated you, or what made you want to teach catechism out of all the things you could have done with your life, especially being an over 18 where, you now have a freedom to do whatever you want with your life, more or less. We can debate later about the restrictions we might face in a Mallu household or whatever of freedom, but you obviously have a lot more time on your hands and you could be doing more. Why did you choose to teach catechism? I
always wanted to be a teacher. So honestly, I came to catechism because I thought it would give me experience. That was a pure reason why. But the reason I stayed is not because of that.
Elaborate, please.
I think the reason I stayed was because I realized how much God, I can be used for God's glory. Like when I first started, I only taught year 7s, year 6s, like that was my range. And then once I was 21, I realized that I want to express God to kids who can feel more of his presence. Like I taught year 6s, and I would talk about God. They'd just look at me like, what are you saying? And I was like, maybe I need to talk to an age group that would receive more of what I can say. And that's when I took up year 11s.
Fair enough.
Yeah.
Okay. Well, you are you're a seasoned veteran when it comes to catechism teaching among the youth. You were the first, as far as I can remember, you were the first youth catechism teacher we had in our parish. I mean, there might have been a couple to come and go, but you were consistent, right? Like, what was that experience like for you? You know, maybe in terms of dealing with parents. I'm sure parents would have doubted your capability, or how would it have felt being the only youth teacher, being the only one who might be the one wanting to do this amidst a bunch of parents who are already teaching catechism? How was that experience being the only one in the beginning?
I think teaching the younger children, parents were okay. I think when I asked to teach the 11s, I had a lot of parents being like, we don't know. The reason why is I understand where they're coming from as well, because I was young and there was content in the book that was, very heavy. They were just like, we don't know if she's ready to be able to teach children. But like, I had that desire in my heart. Like, I was like, God, I feel like I can do this. Like, God, if this is what you want, like, please push it more firm on my heart. And God just kept on pushing it in my heart. So it was hard, but I think the day where Achin was going to tell me if I'm going to do it or not, I told God, I was like, God, I'm tired of fighting. If you want this to be something that you want me to do, please don't let me talk. Just do it for me, please. And God was like, okay. Because I went there and I was going to talk to Achin, and then he's like, you're teaching your 11s and you'll be teaching with another uncle. But that uncle, he was so amazing. He was just he told the catechism kids, told you guys, that she's going to be the person taking care. I'm going to be her sub. And I was like, what? So I had someone, I had that support from that uncle to be like, she will lead it. He trusted me. So I think having people who trust you and believe in you, who are aunties and uncles, was one of the reasons why I could teach you guys. I meant teach year 11s. Fair
enough. And how did it feel? Now we'll touch on it later, how now we've got a huge influx of youth teachers. But how did it feel being the only one in the beginning?
I think it was scary. I was very scared because I thought it was am I impacting you guys? Am I saying things that will affect you guys? But I knew that this was what God wanted, but it was scary. I won't be like, oh yeah, I was so cool. No, I was so scared of you guys as well. I'm like, what do they think of me? Do they think she's weird? Am I being I don't know. I was scared when I first started.
Yeah, but I mean, what you said, you started 2015 and look where we are now, right? You were scared, but look where you are now. God works miracles, right? So like I said, we've done this for quite a while. Why? I'm sure now sorry. Why do you think it's important that youth teach catechism, right? We've seen this in a common trend in our parishes, at least in the earlier side of our Eparchy, where, students will go through the entire catechism system. They'd graduate year 12, and then, a lot of them, as sad as it is to see, and our prayers go out for them even to this day, that, we don't see them in Pali anymore. I know for me that upsets me when I see it. But why? So then one of the things youth can do to stay active in their parish is to teach catechism. So through all your experience of learning and teaching, why do you think it's important that we actually have youth catechism teachers?
I think it helps young people to realize that, once you finish catechism, you don't just leave the church.
Yeah.
You can be a part of the church. There are people, the church is not limited just for aunties and uncles and adults. It's not limited. It's for everyone. Just because you finish catechism, it doesn't mean go somewhere else. It means come back, be a part of it. Because I think when young kids see youngsters, they see people their age, or they see that, they went through catechism, now they're catechism teachers. Maybe it gives them that feeling, as well as parents. It gives some parents to be like, oh, okay, my child possibly can do catechism. I've seen kids who you would be like, I spoke to them be catechism teachers. They'll be like, no, I don't want to do this, and they're now catechism teachers.
I didn't want to do it at first.
I asked you. Yeah. So it's just you'll be surprised. You might be in year 11 or 12 being like, no, I can't do catechism. I'm not good enough. I can't, speak about God. But God is just you just wait, and he might just drag you into catechism. So I think having people who are young teach just shows kids that catechism, talking about God, is not just for adults, it's for everyone. Like God lets everyone speak. Like there's a Bible verse about if you're young, like don't, let people hold you back. I can't remember. I'm not going to butcher it, but there is a verse. But there is something about that. So I think it's just that relatability.
That's the word.
Yeah, that relatability that kids have when they hear from someone who's experienced things that are similar to what they've gone through, gives them a little bit of like, okay, maybe God is in my life as well to help me.
Yeah, and catechism teachers. So I think just to make a callback on something we discussed earlier, right? We said that kids are exposed to a lot more, a lot earlier than we were, right? Like I used to teach year 3s. Now I teach year 10s, but I used to teach year 3s and I would hear things from them that you would not have caught a year 3 aku saying, as immature and dumb he was. You wouldn't have seen me say that kind of stuff. And it's definitely because they're exposed to a lot more with social media, with, the influences they get at school, right? So, for anyone who listening to your story or hearing someone else's story feels compelled to maybe become a catechism teacher, like the time is now. The Catholic Church is in a dire need of good Catholic education for young people, right? And I've got statistics to support it, right? Like according to mainly 2018 statistics, so it's probably worse right now, the number of people who join the Catholic Church outweigh the number of people who leave the the number of people who leave the Catholic Church outweigh the number of people who have joined the Catholic Church by a 4-to-1 margin. Meaning for every person that joins the Catholic Church, right, 4 people have left. Right? Now there's a question to be asked there as to, have they gotten good Catholic education, right? Have they even had catechism happen in their parishes, right? Another statistic, again, 2018, so it's probably worse now. You take an age group of 21-year-olds to 30-year-olds that were once Catholic and now are not. 50% of those people made the decision to leave the Catholic Church before they turned 18. So like many of the current kids we have in catechism right now, like we said, 50% of them have probably made the decision before they've even turned 18 to leave the Catholic Church. And so the question needs to be asked, like, what kind of catechism teaching are we putting out there? What kind of Catholic faith formation are we providing? And so, you're just one example of someone we need. We need, 100 Susmans all over Australia, all over the world. As annoying as it might be,
Wow.
we need people like you, right? Because our church needs these people. Our church needs people to grow and nurture our kids in the way that Christ would want them to. Like you said, with your experience with the kids in Port Pirie, to be a beacon of Christ that they might not have. You mentioned the mothers, the mother example, that a mother can say things that you can't, right? A mother, a parent catechism teacher can fill that void that, of a mother that a child may be feeling in their life, right? One of the things I love about our Lord and Savior Jesus Christ is he said things bluntly, right? He didn't sugarcoat anything. When he would give a call to someone to do something, he would, he'd be blunt about what it would cost out of them, right? So again, we said maybe someone after listening to your story or listening to the story of someone else might feel compelled to teach catechism, right? But what are, I guess, the untold burdens of teaching catechism? Not burdens might be the wrong word, but what does it cost out of a person to teach catechism?
I think you need to realize that you have responsibility. That you need to realize that these children are leaning onto you. Like as much as you'll be like, no, it's just a volunteering thing. It's like these kids are listening to you. They're taking, even if it's just 45 minutes of their lives, they're giving it to you. So you have that responsibility to try and do your best for them. And even if that means, trying to relate to them or going out of your way to do some form of research or anything, but like you have a responsibility that I don't think we talk so much about. We're like, oh, it's a volunteering thing. It is volunteering. We're all volunteering, but we have responsibility to support these kids in growing in faith.
Definitely. I think one of the things we forget, be it SMIM leadership or catechism teaching or any sort of role where you might be teaching, we forget that there's a daily responsibility that we get, right? Like you need to, there's a deeper expectation out of the way you talk, the way you walk, the way you carry yourself. And like you said, you are responsible for these kids and you need to steward that responsibility. I guess anything else? I'm sure one thing anyone who has even contemplated teaching catechism is this feeling of being unqualified or not knowing the answer to everything, right? In your experience, how have you dealt with that?
I think for me, it's just realizing that it's not about you. You need to take away the perspective. Like I've told myself, it's like, you are not the center of attention. It is God. He is the one who talks through you. You know, you just need to be a vessel. Like sometimes you may be like, oh, am I getting to these kids? Am I talking to them? Do they understand God? It's like, God will talk on your behalf. You just need to be confident enough to speak, and the Lord will proclaim. So it's not about you. Like, don't overthink, oh, I'm not good enough. I can't do this. God knows you're good enough. God sees your qualities. He just wants you to let him talk on his behalf. So just be his voice.
Yeah. I mean, it goes back to the old adage, right? God doesn't call the qualified. He qualifies the called, right? And then, so I guess, what about the spiritual cost of it, or like the spiritual preparations that you need to take to be able to teach catechism? What helps you be, you're clearly effective, so what spiritual practices help you, reach that level of effectiveness when you teach catechism?
One thing I've noticed is whenever I teach catechism, when I read from the book, the kids are listening, but when I talk about like my personal experience, I see all eyes look up. They're all just like, yes, we want to hear. So it's just like being relatable, so preparing yourself. Like I think there was a moment when I started teaching you guys catechism, I don't know where it came from, but like I would write all these notes down and I would ask you guys like, oh, what is it you want me to do? And try and touch upon things that you guys are going through. So putting extra effort. I mean, that's what a teacher does. There's always, you teach, but there's so much preparation behind it you need to do in order to be able to deliver what you have to do. So it's just prepare yourself. Yeah. And I know that's a lot more work than you want, but you're doing it for God. And
I'm sure he returns that blessing in one way 100%. Or another. Yeah.
Like I wouldn't say like any time that you put for God is a waste. Never is.
Yeah, definitely.
He'll reward it.
I mean, just because God qualifies you doesn't mean there's no work that you need to do on your side, right? You need to prepare, understand 100%. Content, prepare content, right? What about like spiritual practices? Like what keeps you spiritually attuned when you're teaching catechism?
I think before I start, I teach with Binal now, but whenever I teach, I either pray. I'm like, God, talk in behalf of me, like talk to your children. And I ask him to guide the class. I don't guide it. I'm like, you take control. I'll be your voice. Because there's sometimes I say things and I'm like, oh, that is what they need to hear. Because God's just like, I need to talk to my children. You just pray and let me in. So I think praying, making sure that I read the Bible, making sure that I am attending Kurbana, things like that.
Yeah, and like I'm sure that's a every day of the week thing for you, right? Like we mentioned that you might only be teaching the kids for 45 minutes, right? But there's almost a week of keeping yourself spiritually attuned to what God is saying, right? Because only when you're spiritually active and strong during the week, you know that God is still going to be working through you when you teach that 45-minute class. Obviously there's a risk of, or the cost of not being able to spend time doing other things, right? What's your experience of that?
I think when you think about that, I feel like, can you say that, like, what do you mean by that?
I mean, like, obviously I come to Parli, an hour and a half, 2 hours before Kurban actually starts now to teach catechism, right? That's 2 hours I could have spent on something else, right?
Yeah.
So you obviously have other things I'm sure you would want to be doing with your time, but obviously teaching catechism takes time to spiritually prepare content, right? Like, do you ever feel bad about the fact that you get to miss out, you have to miss out on other things?
No. I think when I was younger, I would be like, oh, I don't get to do things. Like my friends would be like, let's go for brunch on Sundays, and I would be like, no, I have catechism. But I think as I get older, I'm just like, this is my life that I give to God. Like, this is like, I'm not saying like, oh, I do catechism, that's enough. Like, no. I need to do a lot more. But it's like, God is giving me so much. Like every single day, he's just providing for me. Like, I need to do something back. And this is just small. Like, I need to do so much more. But this is a little part of it. So it's just like, when I was younger, yes, I would be like, oh, I can go out. But now I'm just like, I actually like this routine. I love having Sundays as a day that I can put more for God than anything.
Fair enough. Like I'm sure we've touched on before, right? You've had hard moments when teaching catechism, year 7 Aku being one. But even now, I've spoken to you, a lot in the last couple of years, and you have also mentioned there have been hard moments, right? Has there ever been moments for you? Obviously, there's a hard moment, and then there's moments where you're just like, no, there's no point. There's no point in me doing this. Nothing is going to change. Like, what brings you back from moments like that? Or have you ever had those moments?
I haven't had moments like that, but I've had moments where I look at kids and be like, you talk like you're an atheist. what is going to happen to you once you finish catechism? And to be honest, it's not about the impact you make now. You may think that I'm not doing anything, I'm not helping this child, but God is doing something in that child. Like, I remember there was a kid who would ask me all these questions, and I would be like, oh, I'm scared for you and your faith. But he's actually very active in Bali. He's actually, trying his best to be a part of, comes to adorations and stuff. I've seen him around Bali, and it's just like, I was like, you're not the same kid I saw like 4, 3, 5, I don't know how many years you've been, and you're so different. It's like, don't expect the child to change in front of you. He or she will change eventually in God's time, when God wants him to change. So it's not about like, oh, they're not growing out of me, so I'm done. It's like, no, you never know. Like, they will grow in God's timing.
Yeah, like you mentioned, right, in the beginning when I asked you about your Marwala moment, it happened when you were 21 years old, right? These kids you're teaching are, year 11, 16, right? Just because you're not seeing the effect of it now, like you said, doesn't mean God isn't working, right? There's the other old saying, right? Like you hit a rock 10 times with a hammer, right? And it breaks on the 10th hit. It doesn't mean the first 9 were ineffective, right? You might have moments where you're like, what's the point? Like,
Yeah.
I'm sure, like you said, God's timing all changes it. So, Susman, that's pretty much the end of our podcast. A big round of applause for Susman for joining us today. Susman, you've done so much for our community. I've seen it myself. I've experienced it myself. Our whole Eparchy is praying that you reach even higher levels. Your experience has taught us so much things that we can apply in our lives, right? That you've taught us that pretty much if we want to summarize your whole experience, it's just be fully present for God and He will tell you where to go. It might not be easy, but amazing things happen from it. And so from listening to Susman's story, if you feel a call or a deep desire in you to maybe take up a role of teaching catechism, maybe becoming an SMYM leader, or helping out in someone else's, helping out in your church, right? Please understand that the church needs it. The church needs you. You are called to be a blessing. You need to take the time and do the work, but like we've learned from Susman's story, be present and God will work wonders through you. So, Susman, thank you for coming. Thank you for sharing a chaya with me. And all right, and that's a wrap.